Good afternoon, folks. Hope you're good. Just noticed a bit of glitching on the intro there, so it may well be that, as sometimes happens, you have a few minutes where the signal's a bit ropey, but it does seem to settle itself down. That seems to be the theme. Hope you're all good. Let me know you can hear me loud and clear. You know how much I appreciate that. I'm very needy. First few minutes, especially of any episode, to make sure it's working. I've actually turned the microphones on, etc. So do drop me a message in your comments wherever you might be listening to this. We come live at 12:30 till 1 o'clock weekdays. And that's available on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Reason I tell you this is because wherever you're getting this might not be where you'd like to get it. You might bump into it on LinkedIn and rather listen to it on Facebook, or you might feel that if you can't tune in live, you might want to get it on a podcast. So it's available on Spotify and iTunes, etc. Not live, but soon after the fact. And so wherever you fancy listening to chewing it over, whenever you like, it's available as widely as we can on video across social media, and then on any decent podcast player as audio. So really appreciate those of you that have been interacting. It's been really fantastic to put this together for you, but also to interact with you and to get your comments and questions on a regular basis to me, and most importantly, the actual experts I get on now and again as guests. We were meant to have John Ware on today, who's a American physio who's on the right of center of politics in the US, and therefore was going to give his take on the election, much like Sandy did last week. We're going to need to postpone that to Thursday, I'm afraid, because of a time zone issue and the daylight savings and stuff. It disrupted us, and so he's had to head off to work. Totally understandable mistake, and therefore it's easy enough for us to correct and get him on Thursday ahead of the US election. So we're going to be talking US politics a little more with John on Thursday. So at short notice, I then looked at my list of things that I want to chew over with you in coming weeks, of which is like a backup list. And on the top of that is the way in which MSK is presented within the media, how that fits into media bias generally, how that might correlate or not with what I was railing against yesterday with regards to how that's contributing to people's perception of conviction. So if you're up for it, that's where I want to go today. Hope you're all good. And so I want to start with a question. If you're listening live and you can give us a bit of participation, I really want to know how you feel MSK practice, healthcare in general, if you wish, or whatever it is that you do. Do you feel it's fairly represented and accurately represented within the media? What's your take on that? I'm interested in whether or not you feel that it's something that you see as being, you recognize your work reflected in the media. Do you feel like it presents it fairly? Do you think that it actually is a positive influence? Do you get patients that come in contributed to by a media narrative that then helps them to understand what it is you do? Or do you feel that actually their expectation gets shifted by the media in such that they don't feel the patients aren't necessarily getting an accurate understanding of what it is you do? And all of the above, really. It's like anything in between. You know, what's your take on the media landscape? And I'm interested, and I will be giving my opinion, not just on in-industry features there, MSK, healthcare, and beyond. The beyond I'm actually going to visit as well. Like, what is the take on how old media, legacy media is affected by new media, social media, for good and ill, as well as just the general landscape around fake news and the like. I'm just genuinely interested in your take first and foremost, and so please do get your comments coming in, and as well as them reflections on what I might go off on one about. But I'm interested in whether or not you feel, because this certainly, I've been one of the people that's been frustrated over the years with the way in which it's been our profession and this side of the industry is reflected in the media. It's been a frustration, but I've also then done work since with lots of journalists and can understand how that's come about. So I'll talk about my experiences on that. But I also think that there are some aspects where people, you know, disagree and feel that it's overblown. Me and others have sort of made a meal of thinking that actually any publicity is good publicity and that it doesn't really affect practice, that actually it's a cultural phenomenon that's not really influenced by media, that people, if they've got a misperception of what therapists in MSK do, then so be it. That's nothing actually contributed to positively or negatively by the media. I'm interested in that opinion too. So definitely, if you've got your take, I'd be really, I'd really appreciate it. Certainly looking at the comments, a few trickling in, including this from Meekins. Thanks, mate. Afternoon, Belland. Lovely. Lovely to hear from you too, mate. Really appreciate that. But more appropriately, we've got Katie saying new fads get highlighted, not necessarily a common sense approach. Hi, Katie. Scarsbrook said, I think we have a long way to go influencing popular magazines, running magazines to get more evidence-based representation of MSK therapies and what they can do. Yep, some positive and negative there where we've made some progress, but one step forward, two steps back sometimes. I totally agree with Katie on the fads front, and I've got some examples of that recently. But yeah, more importantly, of course, the most correct comment so far is Adam, that yes, I am indeed a bellend. Thank you for that. So keep your comments coming in. Definitely want to know your take on the media landscape. But certainly, let me start with a couple of examples that I've had recently that meant that it ended up at the top of the backup list for a topic to discuss with you all. And that is that I was always sort of started off from a point of frustration at the way in which it was represented, particularly by medical practice or the fact that latest thing to cure OA, low back pain, things that we're in industry we're recognizing as being more complex phenomena with lots of different factors affecting symptomology and presentation and disability and all that sort of stuff, just at a time where the media just doubles down on things being quick fixes and therefore it being an obvious falsehood, even if there's something there's a kernel of truth to it. And I was also frustrated that it wasn't just that there was it was nonsense that came from nowhere. It was often that the journalists were close enough to the sort of scandal literature, essentially, so that there was actually an article, a journal article, or a piece of research that had been done that had then demonstrated efficacy on whatever level for a modality. It was often that was where the starting off point was. It's like latest science shows, and you'll remember antibiotics for back pain was a famous one. You've got a particular flavor of exercise rehab, or you've got that does emerge whereby you've got actually it's sort of research or a misreading of research or an over extrapolation of the data points from research that then drives this story. Then you've got a more obvious one, which is even more frustrating in many ways, but also, kind of a classic celebrity goss type thing where you've got, especially in, say, an athlete or someone that's associated to fitness. So you've got reality TV stars, of course, that then go into the sort of the fitness game and take supplementary products for, it's like aesthetic game, but they do so through fitness or weight loss or what have you. And they then start to drive a media narrative around a particular quick fix. And sometimes that gets associated to injury. Rehab-based stuff, because that's the blurred lines between fitness and MSK, of course. That's frustrating. And each of these things, each of these occasions, I'll be sometimes in the phone book of a few journalists that I've spoken to before that they want you to pass comment on. And that is part of the problem, is that you get journalists wanting you to pass comment on an already sort of a non-story, right? It's not a particularly interesting piece of research that they want you to pass comment on that shouldn't have met a threshold. There's far more interesting things to be doing a story on, but that'd be what the editors asked them to sort of talk about, or that's what the news cycle is spitting out. So you then need to pass comment. So then I'm in a situation where me or others that have spoken to journalists before that are sort of media trained, for want of a better term, we end up in a situation where are you feeding the beast to even comment on this stuff? How do you make it interesting enough for them to actually publish a quote, but without it being, even though fundamentally your advice might be something that is quite bland? So how do you try and make sure that you say something interesting enough for it to actually make press, but then not scandalize it yourself or be a polarizing figure for the sake of it? So Jack Chu, physiotherapist, says bullshit. It's just not. They're not going to publish that, or if they did, it's just not productive. And then the bigger one is then if you're getting sort of a celebrity that said that these 5 things cured my sciatica in order for me to then get my beach bod, ex-reality TV star that's come up with this, that's getting far more publicity for rehab than anything else could do. Do you leverage that opportunity to say, well, it's good that they've sort of stumbled across the fact that these general movements would be useful for sciatica? The worst thing you can do is stay still, etc. Can you see that there are ways in which we could, when me or others could pass comment on it in what could be a positive way, but sometimes we are just fueling that beast. You're legitimizing that style of journalism, legitimizing that style of media, which is I'm often torn over. You know, when I speak, most weeks I'll speak to journalists, not always sort of print press. It could be someone writing a blog for Boots MD or whatever, or they're doing something for a magazine or what have you. And you're trying to offer a positive contribution. Some of the same journalists I speak to that I can't help but laugh whenever they ask me a question. I'm saying, well, it's not dissimilar to what I said last week about this other condition. Really, you need to think about the individual person, and we can't overgeneralize and stuff. And it feels like I'm giving my own talking points, which I think I find myself being a bit boring, really. And so I'm often torn as to how to contribute. So yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts, whether you recognise any of those features, and whether or not you feel like there's a decent representation to it. Meekins has said sex and controversy sell. Unfortunately, yes, I get that, and that's why he's constantly taking photos of himself topless at the moment. And is of course a controversy merchant, so he feeds into that, no doubt. Which is exactly what he's doing recently. Fast, flashy, and fleshy. That's the man. Back and forth then between him and Scarsbrook, I'm not going to weigh into. Adams, though, said, I rarely do media interviews anymore because when I answer their questions, it's normally middle of the road. It depends, etc., and they don't publish it or they misquote you. Yeah, that's what I've ended up in that situation as well. I'm concerned about that. But I also know that there's been times where I've then spoken to a journalist, given my take, and they've basically an angle to a story that they've sometimes pursued. They get me to give my take on it, and it completely cuts against what they were thinking. Right, the whole premise of the story just doesn't apply, and then they're in this funny spot. I end up having to be on the phone to them for 45 minutes trying to explain why their entire worldview is different. So someone rings me up a couple of months ago. They ring me up saying, oh, a lot of people have been working from home on laptops that are low and stuff, and so they develop trigger points in their traps. What is the best way to remove trigger points? And how aggressive do you need to needle them or whatever? You know, the whole premise of the journalist and speaking to me is that they're wanting me to then say yes to aggressive massage, no to needling, yes to tape, no to Theragun. You know, they basically want me to sort of go through modalities of yay, nay. Whereas instead I say, well, actually, the relevance of trigger points or what they are or aren't is actually quite contentious. And they go, okay, say more. By me then explaining and them giving me the time of day, I often completely unpack the premise of their article. So then they're in this situation where do they then print something? And let's say I've been persuasive enough for them to think, okay, actually, I don't want to publish bullshit. I don't want to be that guy. They either print what they were going to do, but with this major caveat, and actually change the story and say, well, it turns out, you know, these things are more complex than we thought, and then give different takes on them. I speak to another therapist, for example, they were quoting other therapists that they'd spoken to that had given clearly more straightforward answers than me, but these were, you know, often you get someone ringing you saying, I want a physio on record because I've got this osteo that said this, what's your take? And so they then, I'm just saying, oh, I just disagree wholeheartedly with that other professional, and this is what I think. So do they publish that balanced argument or say, oh, there's another take on this? Or do they just find someone else who'll say what they want, right? They've just got this premise and they're just looking for some therapist to sign off on it, to say, oh, you know, and they'll find them, right? They'll find some therapist that's just like, oh, I'll say what you want if you're going to put me in the Telegraph. Will you mention my business as well? Oh yeah, cool. So I'll go in the Telegraph and say, I'll say what you need me to say, and then just, yeah, if you can put a link to my website so that I can maybe get a couple of patients that might read it and live locally, that'd be great. And I'll you know, basically sell my opinion for whatever. I know you don't even need to find someone that's going to then go against their own values for it. You know, there's plenty of therapists out there that comply with all sorts of things, saying, oh yeah, well, best thing to do to trigger points is to needle them at this particular angle with this flavor of needle, and then tickle their left earlobe. You know, it's not beyond possibility to do that, and I think that's what's concerning. So I think it's a tricky line to toe, really. I'm like speaking to him, thinking, right, if I go all in on this, I have to try and completely persuade the journalist away from their premise, or I give them something that they would publish that offers that at least pause for thought. It overlaps on yesterday's conversation about conviction, doesn't it? So that's where I'm at with it. It's sort of frustrating. Couple of good comments here. Let's have a look. Kath, I'm going to pull your comment up because it's very rare she doesn't say something very smart. Nature abhors a vacuum. If you don't fill it with your words, then someone else will. Unfortunately, media does not want to hear necessarily what we want to say. Scary stories and fear sell. Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of scandal media, isn't it? And but you know, it's there's plenty of my critics who reckon that I'm a controversy merchant, or that it's all about just me loving the sound of my own voice. He says having a daily show. Of course, there's an element of truth to that, but it's not the core premise of what I'm doing. You know, I hope I'm trying to be at least a force for good. But the accusation is you're just trying to get across everything, trying to get across the entirety of the media. And so, yes, I appreciate what you're saying there, Kath, and I don't disagree for a second. But I also worry that just trying to fill those things so that it then stops the journalists going to someone else who'll say what they say that they want. It's like I can't help but feel like to some extent I and us we're complying within a model that should be reformed, dare I say the R word. And I've got some ideas as to how we can do that, of course, but I do always have some concern over just how compliant should we be, who could we put forward, how can we better media train therapists. And that's where I'm obviously going to then nod to some of the influence work that the MSKR has done later in the conversation. But some great comments, so I'm definitely going to just keep rolling through these. Joe Turner, hi Joe, hope you're good. She said it's interesting how many doctors have been happy over the years to put themselves forward as TV doctors. I'm sure they get a lot of grief, but hopefully the standard increases through feedback and review. Strikes me how reticent we are, maybe reflective of the fact that we rightly spend so much time debating on methods and practices. What would it take to make us get media ready? Lovely. Well, I'm definitely just going to pause there and give a couple of answers to that. I think sometimes it's smart for us to be reticent because unfortunately the journalists are smart in that they can draw you on matter-of-fact points that they just want to quote you on and not really leave the nuance in, which means that you can then make things worse rather than better. And so I think we should be sort of cautious, and we should make sure that people are worldly wise as to those tools of the trade, so that then you don't get misquoted and misrepresented, but also that they don't shape your point in that direction, because we know what it's like if they ever did print a retraction. It's not a retraction that gets read. It's scandal media. They'll do what they can to talk, get up to a line where they can say something that they know is not false but spun, and not get sued for it. So I think that and famously, if you don't know this, but the people that decide exactly what gets printed, the final word on articles are lawyers rather than editors. These are people that essentially that's just about short of slander. So fuck it, we'll put it out there. Now, what I would say though is how we can get that together. How can we be media ready? MSKR as a policy priority, although of course we've had a very disrupted year, we're going to be doing a media training course that we're going to put together with PR professionals and other media trained therapists, speaking to sort of TV docs, etc. And I've worked with some radio docs. When I was on the Jeremy Vine show, I met a lady called Sarah, who's their sort of resident doctor on the Jeremy Vine show and stuff. And we've spoken on and off over the years since then about how we could better that. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that physio, especially in MSK care, just generally with MSK's therapy and sports medicine, that side of the industry, regardless of the profession, it's such a young and developing side of things compared to like giving general piecemeal advice as a medic. It's something that there is just this obvious middle of the road answer that can be given, whereas sometimes our basic advice is actually outrageous to some people. To say, actually, structure doesn't correlate well with symptoms often. That's like a, drop your cup of tea type moment for people like watching Good Morning Britain. They're like, what the hell are they on about? My knee hurts because it's wearing away. Like, how dare you? Whereas, that's a quite milk toast opinion in our industry. Whereas the just sort of GP equivalent of, take your medicine as prescribed, or just that, coughs and colds are caused by viruses, and this is how the virus interacts, and it's like their basic safe points aren't outrageous, and so that's what I think is happening, where you've got this difference there, whereby I think you're always going to have medics that are going to more willing to think in that direction than we would, even though I think that sometimes our opinions would be quite box office in many ways if you had a resident therapist on these TV shows and stuff. But you also don't underestimate that the talents in the talents that's the hosts of the radio and TV shows, don't underestimate how much they'll come for you. I've had so many interactions in radio studios and TV studios where, particularly off camera, the show hosts are just like, well, I hear what you know, that's an interesting point you made there, but I had a back problem and this witch doctor next door sorts me out on a regular basis. So, you know, keep doing what you're doing, but one day you'll be wise enough to work like they do. You know, it's like, don't be underestimated by the fact that some of these celebrity frontmen and women are often of a character profile and have the wealth to dictate a sort of style of care and have their own biases on our opinion, on our industry, that is definitely going to affect it. They just tell the producer, well, don't have him back on. He's talking, you know, sod nuance. It's all about that manipulation. You know, I'll get my car on if you want. You know, it's like I've had that very conversation, and it's like, you know, who's going to win when I'm trying to argue with a producer about potentially having something else on Radio 2, or maybe we could do this and negotiating that. Who's gonna be more persuasive to that young producer, me or Jeremy Vine? It's like, well, of course, it's going to be a challenge, isn't it? So yeah, there's lots of different forces that influence what we're talking about. Now, let's have a look at the comments again. Joe Turner, how depressing. Yeah, soz. It is a bit, but yeah, how to get out of it, of course. The big route out of it, in my opinion, is for us to find a way to actually create a sensible consistency when we do have people that are consulted by journalists and the press in general. We can leverage some consistency, like not have a party line necessarily. I think that's sometimes a problem, but actually just having people that are interesting thinkers, interesting talkers that can give a take on the matter that's not bland, but also doesn't go completely out there and be quite outrageous. You know, it's like the media are often trying to talk about fads and gimmicks. I had someone on the phone the other day asking me my take on Theragun. What's your thought on these guns that have emerged, particularly in lockdown? They're really popular. People can't go for a massage. And so, you know, I'm then saying, well, you know, I'm not averse to them as a self-care thing. If people like it, it feels nice, then crack on. But the suggestion that that's then making any relevant change to people's tissues is a bit of a nonsense. And so people are selling the gun and then saying that you need to go on a course to know how to use it, or taking the gun in for their therapist to use it because the actual angle of which you're then vibrating them is relevant. It just seems like a nonsense to me. And so offering that angle, and they were interested, and I'm pretty sure that got published somewhere, but I'm just meaning that you're in a situation where if you got hold of, we need to train therapists to be able to take that call and to offer that take without me either saying, oh yeah, aren't they brilliant? You know, I think that they're going to really make a difference. And if people start thinking more carefully about their tissue characteristics and really spent at least half an hour a day with a Theragun, then they'd be better off. Where am I getting that opinion from? Even if I was just enthusiastic and thought that, actually that's not a smart thing to put out there. Similarly, if I was just completely nihilistic and said, no, they're absolute bollocks, they've got no utility, it's not something we should really pursue, I don't think that's helpful either. So we need people to be appropriately trained, not cutting my cloth, not that they'd say exactly the same thing as I've said, but just that we contain the ends of that spectrum. We're not nihilistic and dismissive in such a way that they're probably not going to either publish it or it's not going to move things forward. But then similarly, we're not over-endorsing and juicing something that's not necessarily got any sensible evidence behind the claims. And so finding a way that's not bland middle ground, but is still within a sensible contained opinion that most therapists would sign off on. So if someone's a spokesperson that's then attached to a professional title or in industry, that we're not all embarrassed about. Not that we all have to agree all the time, but let's just say a majority would say that's a reasonable statement. That's within the grounds of typical opinion within our profession. And that would be a big thing that I think that would make it more consistent. And then the second thing is to have our own interesting, educational, but entertaining media, be that clips on YouTube, or, you know, obviously I'd try and make a case for shows like this, which I know are interprofessional, but it's just that trying to develop skills whereby we all become a bit more confident to shoot the shit a little bit and to think in public, as we often talk about with MSKR, and sort of have a more confidence to say, well, let's sort of think about the oohs and ahs and not underestimate just how entertaining and interesting some of this stuff is. Like the the myth busting side of our game is often very interesting. So we need to leverage that better. So I really would I would want to definitely integrate some new media features where possible. What have we got here? Let's have a look. Correct. Kim has said, do you think that we now consider normal medical points or only that because of the media exposure? Your example of colds and viruses are relatively normal. Yeah, maybe so, Kim. That's a fair point. I wonder if that's normalized because of media. But also, it's something that the consistency is key there, isn't it? Whereby you've got media trained medical professionals, and also just the standard, the way in which medical standards are upheld postgraduate. The fact that you've got someone that qualifies as a doctor, but then it's incredibly rare that they've not been on some sort of training journey, especially if they're a medical doctor that's then in the media. You're not like getting someone that's then not had anything other than their bachelor's. And so I think that makes a difference, whereby you've got some consistency there. There's not going to be a TV. You've got rogue TV docs, don't get me wrong, and they no doubt make mistakes. But the fact that you've got this sort of layers of credibility within the industry, I think is something that's relevant. And I think that we need to achieve that as well. We need to actually have professionals that have a standard that they can uphold by there being something beyond some consistency between us in terms of what thresholds we've gone through in order to be considered appropriately expert. And I don't necessarily mean qualifications. I just mean some sort of standards we've been able to uphold that offer a legitimate sense of credibility. Let's have a look at the comments. I've got some. I'm getting some abuse from Meekins as usual. Yes, name dropping. Yes, I went on the Jeremy Vine show. Thank you. Yes, name dropping. I thought it was a relevant example of something high profile that I'm just explaining. It's difficult to turn the tide because the fact that even these celebrities can be full of shit. And then if they are, then you're not going to be able to get on the show. But yeah, maybe it was just a clang. Maybe I was just juicing myself up there, perhaps. I didn't even realize it. Thanks, Adam. Kath Piper, patient stories are powerful and relatable for the general public. Where possible, we need to change the perception of physio through that route. GP, A&E TV documentaries give insights into work in those areas. Yes, I think that trying to create those. So I agree, but it's something that's difficult to leverage those sorts of anecdotes without them thinking, well, that's going to, if that was, it is potent and powerful, but you've also got there's plenty of patient anecdotes that are only going to perpetuate poor practice and poor care and be gimmicky, right? So, for example, the media had a big excited about latest research about a few years ago now, 5 years ago, the antibiotics for back pain. There's no way that you wouldn't be able to find someone that had antibiotics that then relieved their back pain that you could then get on Good Morning Britain, then being full of tears about how much that's changed their life, right? So it is powerful, but it can be a powerful force for good and for ill. So I'm not disagreeing, and we should leverage that and should explain these sort of life-changing events that patient and quality thorough individual could have. We can't be naive to think that will only leverage for ill, and so I think that's something that I'm concerned about. Said could do some media training. I know it's how you have to explain to me as to whether you mean personally do some media. I should give you training. Like, I'm certainly not qualified to give out media training. I've done a little bit of media. I recently listened to every other sentence, kind of. If that's one of mine, I'm trying to clarify a minute as to whether or not, I don't know if this is a critique of me, which absolutely fine. Struggling to understand what as meaning you've listened to podcasts and therefore you've found me wanting and I should do some training because I've been poor. That's fair enough. I'm interested in that opinion. Don't know if that's what you're meaning. So yeah, if you can just clarify, that would be great. But I do accept that we are out of time. Thank you so much as ever for your contributions. Main theme of what we're talking about here is how well representative do you feel that your industry is in the mainstream media? How could we then positively change that in a sensible and practical fashion that actually does make a difference? Is that fighting a losing battle? At the moment, it's a bit of a lull in that there's no significant interest in our side of the game because everything is especially anything health related, is just got a COVID overlay. I think some angles in there that we're thinking of pursuing is that obviously the rehab elements that are not just about COVID patients, but COVID displaced patients, and the way that people have not necessarily, amount of people sat on waiting lists, or people that haven't had their joint replacements or other interventions that they would have otherwise sought help for, or they've got misadvice from Dr. Google because they've been sat at home and not able to access care. There are angles there that might be able to be pursued, but at the moment it's sort of a bit dry unless it's the media landscape for sort of journalistic interest in our side of the industry is at a bit of a lull. And so maybe that's a chance to regroup. I'm not sure, but we've got some ideas. Certainly, if you're interested in that, then the influence work stream, Ash James Work, who's the great media spokesperson, that's definitely something that we're trying to pursue. But so please do join. It's only £10 for the year to get involved with MSKR, to potentially be involved in that sort of media training aspect if you feel you want to pursue that yourself or contribute to it, or share your stories as to how you feel it can be for good or for ill. I've not heard on the comments any comments about the fact that this is being overblown. I think that is an opinion that's out there. I've heard it from some people, just not on this chat, whereby actually no, I think it's actually fairly good. Any publicity is good as publicity, that sort of thing. So yeah, do let me know. Sally's now clarified that it wasn't me. No, well, thanks, Sally. That's good news. But similarly, yeah, if you can, I'm really interested in your take on that, by the way, Sally. So please do let me know if you unpack it in a comment or drop me a message privately if you'd rather, just to explain a little bit about what it is that you feel you'd recommend, because we'd definitely love to hear more about that. Anyway, I'm over time now, and I usually try to keep to time, so I will clear off. Thank you so much. I will see you tomorrow for more Chewing It Over, but particularly on Thursday, make sure you join me and John Ware talking about US politics from a sort of right of centre. I don't think I'm misrepresenting him to say, but a right of centre perspective compared to the left of centre perspective we had from Sandy last week about the US presidential election. So we'll be stuck into politics on Thursday's show. But otherwise, thanks a lot as ever. I'll see you soon.